My name is Anagha and I'm part of the data science discovery staff, and today we're going to be doing some code here and trying to debug common issues when importing data frames using pandas. So let's go ahead and get started. So here I have my Jupyter notebook up and I just have some common issues that are in each of the cells. Let's go ahead and try to run these and figure out what's wrong. So first I have importing the library, right? I'm importing pandas as PD. Okay, that looks great. And then I have df, that's what I'm going to call my data frame. So I have df equals df.readcsv, and then I have basically the link of the CSV file that I'm using in quotes, and then I print out my data frame. So let's run this. When I run it, it says here data frame object has no attribute read CSV. Well, the good thing about using Python is that it gives super helpful error messages as well as a traceback, which points to literally exactly the line where the error is at, right? So it's super easy to try to figure out what's wrong, right? So it says here data frame object has no attribute read CSV. Well, I'm using pandas. The pandas library has the function read CSV, and it looks like here when I look at the traceback here, right, it says that the second line, which has df equals df.readcsv, is incorrect. And oh look, it even highlighted df for me. So when I'm trying to use my pandas function, I think over here, right, I used my data frame instead of my library, which is pandas, right? So I'm importing my pandas as PD. PD is like the alias or the name that we're giving to the library that we import. We don't have to write as PD, right? We could just write import pandas and use pandas everywhere else, but PD makes it a bit shorter. It's also a naming convention, so that's why we need to use PD everywhere else. But here we use df, so if I change it to PD, now we know that the data frame object that we were using before, which was df, right? That had no attribute read CSV, but we know the pandas library, which we imported as PD, so that's why we're using PD, that has the attribute read CSV. So then when I run it, okay, I get my data frame, so that's all good. Now let's go ahead and look at this second cell. So it says here importing pandas as PD. Okay, that's good. And then I have df equals pd.readcsv. So I fixed that error from above, so that's good. And then I have my URL of my CSV file in quotes, and then I print out PD. So let's go ahead and run this. And it says here module pandas from this whole basically the location, the path where I have this library downloaded essentially in my computer. It says that's the module pandas that you're trying to access, right? But we wanted to print out the data frame, but it printed out this module. Well, when you see this code, there's no error necessarily. So it's not a syntax error, but it may be a logic error, right? And the syntax error is when there is a certain there's certain incorrect syntax in your code. For example, if I forgot this ending quote here, that would give me, it says right here, right? It says a syntax error. So my code compiles, right? It compiles, there's no syntax error, but it's not doing what I expected it to do, right? So that means it's a logic error. And what is a logic error? Well, I wanted to print out my data frame df, but instead I printed out the library that I was trying to access, right? I import pandas as PD, and when I print out PD, the fact that it gives me the module pandas from this specific directory, I mean, that makes sense, right? But that's not what I wanted to do. So I can instead comment this out and print out my correct result that I wanted to print out, which is essentially my data frame. And when I run that, well, I get my data frame, so that is also good. Okay, now when I have my third cell, I have here df equals pd.readcsv, and I'm going to essentially restart my kernel because we're trying to simulate this as every single cell is kind of a different notebook that I might have, and and that's like the starting of my code basically. So I don't want our previous cells to, affect the output of the current one. So I'm just going to restart my kernel so that all of these variables are not really stored in memory. And now I have here df equals pd.readcsv, and then I have my link of my CSV file, and then df, right? So then when I try to run this, imagine that this is like an entirely new notebook. I haven't really imported any sort of libraries. I haven't done anything. This is my first cell in my new notebook that I just opened. And it says here, well, name PD is not defined. Well, that's because if this was a brand new notebook where I didn't import anything, but I'm trying to do pd.readcsv, well, I'm using PD, which is that alias, that short form abbreviation for pandas, right? If I'm doing pd.readcsv, but I haven't really imported pandas yet, well, of course the error makes sense, right? It says PD is not defined, well, because I never defined it, right? I never imported the library. I never imported pandas as PD. How can I even use PD then in my code? So in my first line of cell, we needed to add this. We needed to add import pandas as PD. So now that PD is defined, now that when I run this, it gives me my data frame, which is good. Okay, now in my second to last cell, I have import pandas as PD, df equals pd.read CSV, and then I have my CSV URL, and then I do df. So then when I try to run this, okay, I see it's syntax error, which means that according to the Python language structure, language syntax, I didn't follow that. So that's what the syntax error means. And it says here invalid syntax, and it kind of points to in the cell 3 in line 2, right? So we know that when we try to read in a CSV file using pandas, we need to pass the URL of the CSV file inside these parentheses. But right now, since it should be a string, right, that URL file should be, or that URL of the CSV file, that should be a string. And I know that strings are surrounded by quotes, but over here, this link is not surrounded by quotes. So instead, it may as well be a variable, right? But we need to add quotes to show that, okay, this is a string. It's the URL of my CSV file. That's why I'm passing it into the read CSV function. So basically, this code we can copy down this next line, comment this out, and essentially surround this in quotes. So this should be the correct answer. And when I try to print it out, okay, I get my output. And in my last cell, I have import pandas as PD. df, I have the URL of the CSV file in quotes, and then I print out my df. So then when I try to print it out, okay, it gives me the URL in quotes. Well, it's not a syntax error, right? The code compiled. There's no there's no syntax error that popped up, but this may be a logic error, right? Because I actually wanted to print out my data frame that looks like this, but instead the actual URL showed. Well, that makes sense because on the second line, when I assign a value to my df variable, I assign the URL of the CSV file itself. But what we have to do, if we, and that may be fine in some cases, right? But we want to read in the CSV file and assign that resulting data frame to my df variable, right? So I need to do df equals pd.read CSV, and then I have my, essentially my file in quotes, and then I surround it by these parentheses. I pass that URL into the function read CSV, and now when I print it out, I get my entire data frame. So hopefully those were some helpful debugging strategies on how to kind of go through and solve common issues. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you next time. Bye.